नमस्कार मंडळी. आपल्या सर्वांचं बृहन महाराष्ट्र मंडळ तत्वज्ञान या उपक्रमात स्वागत आहे. मागच्या आठवड्यापासून आपण आपली एक नवीन मालिका सुरू केलेली, जिचं नाव आहे द कॉन्शियसनेस. मालिकेचे 4 भाग आहेत. मागच्या भागात आपण ब्रेन, माइंड आणि सेल्फ याच्यामध्ये न्यूरोसायन्स आणि नेचर ऑफ कॉन्शियसनेस बघितला. डॉक्टर विनोद देशमुख जे या मालिकेचे वक्ते आहेत, त्यांनी आपल्याला हे सायन्सच्या दृष्टीने फार सुंदर समजावून सांगितलं. काका छानपैकी स्लाइड्सही घेऊन आलेले आहेत. तसंच आज आपला या मालिकेचा दुसरा भाग आहे. त्याचं नाव आहे लिमिट्स ऑफ सायन्सेस. कॅन सायन्स एक्सप्लेन सब्जेक्टिव्ह एक्सपिरियन्सेस. हा एक विषय घेऊन आज काका आपल्या समोर आलेले आहेत आणि ते आपल्याला हे सगळं समजावून सांगतील. आपण आधी सर्वप्रथम आपले सुरुवातीचे श्लोक घेऊया आणि मग नंतर आपण काकांना विनंती करू की त्यांनी आजच्या सत्राला सुरुवात करावी. सद्गुरुनाथ महाराज की जय. गलद्दान गंडम मिलभृंग खंडम चलच्चारुशुंडम जगत्राण शौंडम लसद्दंत कांडम विपभ्रंग चंडम शिवप्रेम पिंडम भजे वक्रतुंडम. अहम निर्विकल्पो निराकार रूपो विभुर्व्याप्य सर्वत्र सर्वेन्द्रियाणां. सदा मे समत्वं न मुक्तिर्न बन्धः. चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं. चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं. गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरा. गुरुः साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः. ब्रह्मानन्दं परमसुखदं केवलं ज्ञानमूर्तिं द्वन्द्वातीतं गगनसदृशं तत्त्वमस्यादिलक्ष्यम्. एकं नित्यं विमलमचलं सर्वधी साक्षिभूतं भावातीतं त्रिगुणरहितं सद्गुरुं तं नमामि. श्री सद्गुरुनाथ महाराज की जय. तर आपण विनोद काकांच्या हाती पूर्ण सूत्र देण्याच्या आधी परत एकदा आठवण करून देते की आपले आजचे जे वक्ते आहेत डॉक्टर विनोद देशमुख हे एक डिस्टिंग्विश न्यूरोसायंटिस्ट आणि फिलॉसॉफर आहेत. यांचे आपण बरेच लेख, त्यांनी टिपलेली छायाचित्र आपल्या व्हॉट्सअप ग्रुपवर बघत असतो आणि आज ते त्यांच्या या द कॉन्शियसनेस या मालिकेचा दुसरा भाग आपल्याला समजावून सांगणार आहेत, लिमिट्स ऑफ सायन्सेस. काका तुम्ही तयार आहात ना?
हो.
हा, तुम्ही शेअर करू शकता तुमच्या स्लाइड्स आता.
ओके, थँक्यू. दिसतंय ना?
हो, दिसतंय.
हा, ठीक आहे.
तुम्ही त्याला प्रेझेंटेशन मोड मध्ये घेतलं ना तर जास्त मोठं आणि व्यवस्थित दिसेल.
लेट मी सी.
खाली असेल पहा. हा, खाली आहे बघा. राईट हँड साईडला असं एक टीव्हीचं चित्र आहे, त्याच्यावर क्लिक केलं तर ते प्रेझेंटेशन मोडला जाईल. पॉवर पॉइंट वरतीच, झूम वर नाही. खाली आहे बघा, एकदम राईट हँड साईडला खाली. हा, ते त्याच्या बाजूला.
स्क्रीन.
नसेल जमत तेच ओके काका. खाली आहे
ओके.
ऍक्च्युली. तुम्ही होतात तिथे जिथे ते पर्सेंटेज वगैरे आहे ना, त्याच्या बाजूलाच एक असा टीव्हीचा सिम्बॉल आहे, त्याच्यावर तुम्हाला क्लिक करायला लागेल. हा, तो बरोबर.
Oh, okay. Is that better?
Huh. This is
Yeah,
much better.
okay. So today's topic is very interesting in a way. I mean, it's profound in the sense for most people in modern age, science means everything. They think science can answer everything, science understands everything, science can do anything. But then the profound question for us is, are there limits to science? Can science explain our self aware being? Can it explain our live presence, live silence, the profound experiences that human beings are capable of having, which have been recorded since the Vedic and the Upanishadic period? These profound spiritual insights into oneself as well as in the universe as a whole, nature as a whole. So it was interesting that I was looking around some of my books in the library, and I came across this book. It's called the In Search of Divine Reality and the Science as a Source of Inspiration. This was written by a close friend of mine. His name is Professor Lothar Schaefer. He is actually professor of physical chemistry in University of Arkansas. But I met him in the World Association of Vedic Studies because he was very interested in Eastern philosophy and also trying to understand quantum physics, quantum chemistry. And he came up with this book and he signed it for me on July 9th, 2004, in one of the Waves conferences. And then we became very good friends. We had common interests. And then he invited me for giving a talk on another conference in Barcelos in Portugal. This was in 2010. He was one of the speakers. I was one of the speakers about brain and consciousness. And there were four other speakers. It was a wonderful series of lectures. And they were sponsored by Antonio Cunha, a great host. We stayed with them, and it was a wonderful series of science talks on brain and spirituality, or science, neuroscience, or consciousness and religiosity or spirituality. So this is the one of my favorite books. I read it completely at that time, and now I'm rereading it with fond memories of Lothar Schaefer. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. We miss him. This is another of his book called The Infinite Potential. He was totally convinced that the quantum physics has to change its perspective, its views, and its boundaries in which we speculate and we sort of do all the mathematical equations. But only mathematical equations are not enough. We need to really have the experience, understanding, and the insights into the reality, infinite reality, with both potentiality as well as actuality. There are many pioneers in both the field of quantum physics as well as neuroscience. I'm going to mention just a few. Erwin Schrödinger was a great, of course, most people know him, his first name, I mean, his name in quantum physics. He came up with the famous equation, wave function equation, and also the Schrödinger cat is well known. But he was familiar with Eastern philosophy. He had read Upanishads. And he was very fond of the sort of holistic approach to life and nature as a whole. And the recognition of natural order, implicate order, or the holistic order. Then John A. Wheeler raised the question of the variables of the observer variables. We always need to consider the observer and his state of his observation. And then he came up with the idea that it from bit, it means a particular thing comes from bit, which is information. So he brought into daylight the concept of information. David Bohm was another great physicist, and I met him in London when I was doing neurosurgery at Atkinson Morley's Hospital. And I requested to see him briefly because he was also very fond of J. Krishnamurti. And David Bohm came with the idea of hollow movement, implicate order. Those were profound. He was a great thinker. And some of the books and dialogues between David Bohm and J. Krishnamurti are really enlightening. Lothar Schaefer already mentioned his two books and his contributions. Subhash Kak is a great friend of mine, and we've been interacting for many years now. He wrote an introduction to my book, The Astonishing Brain and Holistic Consciousness. He has talked about many things, integrating quantum physics, computer science, information technology, and the Vedic studies, Kashmir Shaivism. He is a profound writer and thinker. Federico Fagin, actually, Federico Fagin is one of the quantum physicists, and his latest book, Irreducible, he really made everything very concrete and clear-cut in quantum physics after his own spiritual insight. And he, at the end of the book, he gives a glossary of terms and defines all the terms, which are very helpful. I liked some of his terms like live information, quantum information, energy and information working together. So his ideas, and I was very happy to see that at the end of the book, he does acknowledge the contributions from Vedas and Upanishads. And he mentioned that these Vedas and these ideas have been there for last 3,500 years. So he has a great respect for Vedic insights. In the neuroscience, I think David Chalmers created the big term called the hard problem of consciousness. He said, no matter how much neuroscience works and at what microscopic or even levels you work and find out this and that, you will never understand what conscious experience or self-awareness is. And that is the hard problem. The easy problem is conscious correlates of consciousness. But the hard problem is to understand the awareness itself, self-awareness, self-aware being. That's why I wrote an article differentiating between consciousness with content and awareness by itself, or pure awareness, or non-dual awareness. Jack Panksepp was a profound thinker and a pioneer. He was actually professor of veterinary medicine, but he did some very fundamental work, and he wrote the first book called The Affective Neuroscience. He was a pioneer. He studied a lot of animals and, of course, studied their emotions, feelings, and his profound statement is, I feel, therefore I am. And that is very true, and he stuck with that. I feel, therefore I am. And he demonstrated about 7 basic emotions in animals as well as human beings and their neural networks. Then Antonio Damasio is a professor of neurology, and he has contributed immensely. He started publishing several books and contributed about the nature of consciousness, different types of consciousness, and also different types of self. He talked about the proto self, core self, and autobiographical self. So he introduced these terms, and they had great impact on neuroscience and the neurophilosophy. Then Mark Solms is a psychiatrist from South Africa, professor of psychiatry, and he was very impressed and actually worked with um, Jack Panksepp, and he published a book called The Hidden Spring of Awareness or Consciousness. And he believes there is a big debate between whether consciousness occurs only in the cerebral cortex or does it occur in the brainstem and the reticular limbic system or both. So these are some of the questions. Jack Panksepp and Mark Sohn both favor the arousal hypothesis and the arousal of awareness, consciousness, attention from brainstem reticular activating system and the limbic system and then the cortex for cognition and communication. Christoph Koch worked for many years with amazing fundamental research on correlates of consciousness, both in animal experiments as well as human studies. But there is a limit to which you can take the correlates of consciousness. As David Chalmers said, these are all easy problems and solutions. But the hard problem of actual conscious experience, subjective experience, is very difficult to explain on the basis of that. Christoph Koch also worked with some of the Buddhist monks and their meditative practices. He himself did meditation, and now he's leaning more towards Buddhist states of meditation, even panpsychism, possibility of panpsychism. Michael Levin is a professor of developmental biology, and he has done some wonderful work on planaria, flatworms, and he measures the voltage with voltage colors in the cells and the developing embryos and maps the voltages and changes the voltage. And by doing that, he changes the overall body pattern or bow plan of that animal. So he could produce a flatworm with one head or two heads or no heads. So by manipulating bioelectric pattern of the embryo as a whole, you can change the adult organism. And Michael Levin believes that it is the bioelectric pattern and its memory that works almost like an agent that shapes the body and the growth of the living organism. His work is fascinating. You should look it up. Then there is a profound exponential growth in the studies of consciousness. Oxford University came up with this encyclopedic dictionary on consciousness. And then, of course, Cambridge University came with the Handbook of Consciousness. These are profound sources of detailed information about consciousness. This is Jack Pank's book, Affective Neuroscience. I feel, therefore I am. Maybe And he developed the idea of primary, secondary, and tertiary emotional as well as cognitive states, starting from the subcortex, brainstem reticular activating system, to the limbic system, then the basal ganglia, and then the cortex. And he describes 7 primary emotions and their neural circuits. The 7 emotions he mentioned are seeking, that means searching, exploring, looking for either food or mate or whatever your needs are. Lust, care, caring for the little one. Rage, anger, fear, panic, and play. All animals like to play, so play is an instinct or one of the. And not only that, Panksepp even described the neural circuits involved in in these different emotions. This is the book by Mark Soames, The Hidden Spring. And he again is convinced about the primacy of feelings and the subconscious desires. And he studied some of the anencephalic babies, babies that were born without the cortex. And these babies still have feelings of being, of having feeling of joy, feeling of anger, feeling of uh, fear. So what his basis is that even though they don't have a cerebral cortex, they are still living beings with feelings. That's why feelings are very important. And then he described mesolimbic dopamine system by which we express our subconscious desires and pleasures and displeasures. He described the extended reticular activating system. Extended reticular activating system not only is in the brainstem, but also goes to hypothalamus and the non-specific thalamus. So it's a very profound fundamental system. And he went on to describing the concepts of pleasure, displeasure, and even nirvana. In his book, he mentions nirvana, which is like sthita prajna or samadhi, which is very interesting. One of the modern neuroscientists, professor of neuroscience, is Dr. Buzaki. His 2 most influential books. The first one was about the circadian brain rhythms. And the second one, the latest one, is The Brain from Inside Out, the primacy of action, perception, and integration cycles. In neurology also, there has been a lot of research being done, especially in patients with coma, unconscious patients. What has recently been described is what is called the minimal conscious state, in which the apparently comatose or unconscious patients, they did brain mapping, and during the brain mapping, they asked the patients, for example, if you are a tennis player, you pretend as if you are shooting a ball with a racket in your right hand. And with that, some patients actually showed increased activity in the left hand area, which people were surprised. That means they have some minimal awareness, although they cannot communicate from that comatose state. Then another new technique came. Julio Tononi is involved in that, in which you do a transcranial magnetic stimulation with magnetic poles in the temporoparietal occipital area, and then you record the EEG response of the brain and how complex it is. and you map the complexity of that response, and based on the complexity of that electrophysiological response, he calculates a value of 5, phi 5. And from that, you can tell whether the person is conscious or drowsy or unconscious or anesthetized or vegetative state. And from that, he developed what is called the integrated information theory, which is a very popular theory at present. In a book recently published called Handbook of Research on Evidence-Based Perspectives on the Psychophysiology of Yoga and Applications, I wrote a chapter, the 5th chapter, called The Neurophilosophy of Meditation. And this is a brief summary of it. Meditation is the art and science of optimal self-integration. We are naturally nested in nature. Meditation is being at peace with oneself and at home in the world. It is the art of self-observation, learning, and developing presence of mind and selfless love. It is a unique mode of being present in the moment. Nowadays, I call it the pristine presence or live presence. It is a natural state of health and happiness. We should let go of the vicious cycle of negative thoughts and feelings and discover the virtuous cycle of positive feelings like joy, cheerfulness, equanimity, friendliness, compassion, and love. This is possible through meditative practices like yoga, mindfulness, flow state, and nature experience. With advancement in neurobiology, we can understand how these meditative skills are learned, developed, evolved, and mastered. These meditative skills and lifestyle are the key to positive psychology and mental health. These secular meditative practices are being recommended in our education and healthcare systems, even in schools. Then in the same chapter, I listed 10 different important aspects of what is called Advaita Bhava, non-dual awareness, or pure awareness, or awareness itself. One is the presence, sense of presence or being. Second is emptiness, in which the mind is still, silent, and serene, and clear. Third is the non-representational cognizance. Representation means the mind has created an image of something that it experienced. But non-representation means you directly experience what's happening now at the present moment. Then there is luminosity or radiance. It's sort of what I call the light of presence. And then bliss, silent feeling of contentment, non-duality. There is no subject-object duality. It is infinite, it is boundless, limitless, both in time and space. And it is interconnected. It is whole. It is a unity, oneness. And it is continuously present, continuously fresh. It is pristine. And the self as aware presence, singular and continuous. This is not a self in the usual sense of constructed self or remembered or recalled self. I am so and so. It's not the me and my world. It is the I itself. Self is, yet non-dual awareness is not someone else's awareness or an object fundamentally different from oneself. Rather, it is who one is and has always been as the conscious presence in all of one's experiences, an intrinsic reflexive knowing. Donald Pfaff is a professor of neuroscience, New York University. And he published this courageous book called Brain Arousal and Information Theory. He calls it courageous. He himself said that because not many professors of neurology or neuroscience dare talk about conscious arousal and its spontaneity and autopoietic um, part of the brain, that it arouses by itself, it generates itself, it is self organized, it manages itself, it controls itself. But his book is profound. Generalized arousal is higher in an animal or human being who is more alert to sensory stimuli of all sorts, more motorically active, and more reactive emotionally. This is the most fundamental force in the nervous system. And in a sense, this is the most fundamental force in nature itself. It is interesting that great enlightened souls like Sri Raman Maharshi, he always talked about, he said this energy and awareness is something like electricity. He says as if there is a dynamo in the heart that generates electricity, and then that goes to the fan when it makes the fan move. If it goes to the light, it makes the bulb light and illuminate. So he had this kind of first hand personal experience. But now we understand more about bioelectricity, biomechanics, biochemistry, and person like Michael Levine is in fact busy trying to write a textbook on bioelectricity. And there are other scientists who are thinking that the whole universe is like a bioelectric phenomenon. So it's a very bioelectric field. Benjamin Libet has done some very interesting experiments on volitional control or willful control on our actions. He asked the people, he gave them a choice to press the button at whatever time or whatever, whenever they feel like doing it. And he said, just notice where the clock uh, time is, what the clock time is. And then he measured the EEG of these people, volunteers, and published a lot of data, lot of controversial data. And what he found is that the brain starts way before you make the choice of pressing the button or you become aware of it. Before that, the brain is already aroused and ready to do that. Now, how that happens, nobody understands. But in this book, he finally says it is probably our preconscious or subconscious mind that is already working toward this goal. And then the conscious mind just acknowledges, yes, I made that decision, or it's time to press the button. It's a very interesting book. This book was edited by Subhash Kak, Quantum Physics of Consciousness. Fascinating book with multiple authors, great contributions. And Subhash Kak always said that computers can never become conscious. AI can never become conscious or become self aware. This article presents the case for the existence of a separate principle of consciousness to complement physical law. Since this principle cannot be dynamical, it is suggested that it manifests itself by enhancing probabilities associated with natural processes in a manner that favors life. Improbable coincidences attested in the literature are presented as evidence for this probability enhancement. He, of course, has published many books, and there are many videos available, many of his talks and lectures. It's worth listening to him. Lothar Schaefer wrote a chapter in his book also, and some of his ideas. Life is not evolving in a vacuum. but within the natural order of the universe. Thus, it is a manifestation of the universal order. It is called Rutam in Sanskrit and not a violation of it. His emphasis on symbiosis and cooperativity in life was precious. Fitzroy Capra, you may have heard of him. In fact, I listened to one of his talks in London, The Tao of Physics. It was just published and had a great impact on the not only the physicists, but all the science as a whole, because he took a different perspective than the particulate physics. He thought about ecosystems view of life, autopoiesis, self-organization, symbiosis, environmental awareness, and finally self-awareness. This new book of his with Capra and Luigi is very interesting. It's almost like a textbook, the systems view of life. Very interesting book. Rupert Sheldrake has, of course, he was at Cambridge studying chemistry and all, did a lot of work. Then he went to India. He was there working on plants, development of plants and crops. He was also interested in Hinduism, Vedic studies, Upanishads. And he went to an ashram which was run by a Christian monk, because one of the Hindu monks told him that you are born in a Christian tradition. You should continue in that tradition. There is no need to change it. Just go to the deeper understanding of what Jesus said, and you will understand. And he followed his advice and stayed with that and developed his own views and understanding in his own faith, in his own spirituality. And now he's a profound thinker. His main new idea is morphic resonance, holistic field view with interconnectedness and multiple levels of self-organization, resonant life forms, and a memory in nature itself, in the resonant forms, resonant fields. And more recent book is by this Federico Fagin, Irreducible, Consciousness, Life, Computers, and Human Nature. Panpsychism, as I mentioned, is the idea that there is an aspect of consciousness has always been an integral part of reality. It has been proposed in Vedas, Plato, Plotinus, Spinoza, Leibniz and Russell, and many others. And this new theory, quantum information processing theory, claimed that the quantum system in a pure state consciously experiences its state. There is this panpsychism, there is also pantheism, that means God is in everything, and panentheism. Panentheism means God is both transcendent as well as immanent, which is also the position taken by Radhakrishnan or some of the Vedic philosophies. Federico Fagin describes some of these terms are from his book. He calls it the one, the totality of what exists, both in potentiality and actuality. One is irreducibly holistic, dynamic. One is the interiority that connects all its creations from within. One wants to know itself and self-actualize. Then he talks about consciousness. Units emerge from one each time one knows itself with a new perspective about itself. He mentions truth. When you are totally one with it, integrated, then you understand truth, the holistic and the dynamic nature of one. He talks about sati. Sati means the observer or the experiencer or the self or the Atman. Sati is a quantum entity with three irreducible and indivisible fundamental properties: consciousness, agency, and identity. The elementary seities, which I have called consciousness units, emanate directly from the One. The One you may call the divine, the sacred, God, Atman, Brahman, whatever name you want to call it, or Naumen. Then quantum entanglement, of course, is now an established phenomenon. Recently, 3 Nobel Prizes were um, offered or given for their research on quantum entanglement, which is an established fact now. A bit is like binary between 0 and 1, but the qubit, the quantum bit, is different. The qubit or quantum bit is the elementary unit of quantum information. It is the quantum version of classical bit. While a classical bit only represents two possible states, the qubit represents quantum superposition of two complementary state vectors in two-dimensional Hilbert space. I don't understand all the details of this physics, but the idea is interesting that we need to go farther than just the binary thinking. Then his idea of live information, I liked it very much. The type of information used by scientists to communicate living organisms. It consists of elementary particles, atoms, molecules that interact quantumly and self-organize based on quantum rather than classical laws. Live information makes no sharp distinction between energy, matter, and information. So you put energy, matter, and information together, which makes it the live information. He talks about consciousness units. Then he differentiated between knowing and knowledge. Knowing as a process of knowing, and knowledge just as an established fact, which is based on memory. So conscious knowing versus subconscious knowledge, connoisseur versus superior, explicit versus implicit. Explicit versus implicit are terms accepted in neuroscience nowadays. And presence versus represence. Presence is authentic, spontaneous, pristine. It is live. It is not a memory. Represence is based on memory, is based on what happened before. Now versus memory, direct versus virtual. Direct means like Shankaracharya's book on Aparokshanubhuti. Aparokshanubhuti is a profound book, and there are many books, of course, in the Vedic tradition about the Sakshatkar or Sakshi Bhav, Sakshatkar. There's a lot of debate about free will, whether we really have free will or not. There are professors of neuroscience who would say that we don't have any free will. It is just an illusion. And yet we have a distinct feeling that, of course, we have free will. So it's still an ongoing debate. Qualia is an interesting term that came along with David Chalmers' challenge of hard problem of consciousness. He mentioned the term qualia. Qualia means you have a sensory perception and a feeling that goes with your sensory perception. And that quality of feeling, quality of experience is what is called qualia. And it cannot be really described in words, but it is a direct experience. Then people have been searching for the seat of the soul in the brain for centuries and even longer. I know this author, Michael R. Trimble. He's from the National Institute of Neurology, Neuroscience in London. I also worked there. He was a professor of neurology. And his book, The Soul in the Brain, his research was more on epilepsy. And he came up with the idea that many of the epileptic patients who have the focus in posterior cingulate cortex and the precuneus, they are more likely to have a disturbance of their sense of self or soul. Rudolf Linus is, of course, well-known professor of neuroscience, and he published this book, Eye of the Vortex, Neurons to Self. He has done a lot of fundamental research, and he thinks that concept of I is ineffable. It can't be described. It's almost like describing a complex dynamic vortex. He says it's almost like explaining to somebody how a democracy works, how different representatives are elected, how they are selected, and the president is elected. So it's a very complex process, and it's not entirely reliable all the time, but it's difficult to describe. This is the book I mentioned, Antonio Damasio. He talked about proto-self and proto-consciousness, core self and core consciousness, and autobiographical self and autobiographical consciousness. His latest book is about feelings and thinking. Now he's recognizing more and more the importance of feelings. This is the latest book by Christoph Koch. Then I am myself the world. What consciousness is and how to expand it. Neural correlates of consciousness, interconnected unity in life and nature, Buddhism and panpsychism. This is a very interesting book by Douglas Hofstadter. I'm a strange loop. And he makes the point that the I itself can never be described or formulated or put in an equation because it is not a static entity. It is a very dynamic loop, a dynamic activity that is live and occurs spontaneously in all of us. It's a fascinating book. This is a very interesting book by David Eagleman, who is another professor of neuroscience. He used to be in Houston, and now he's on the West Coast in California, live wired. I think he's in Stanford. And he studies all the sensory impressions and the electrical activity related to different senses. And then he tries to create a pattern of electrical stimulation to create that particular experience. Then there are books about the electric universe by Wallace Thornbill and David Talbot. Bioelectric universe, universal ecosystem with multiple living and non-living constituents working together for the flourishing of the ecosystem as a whole. Then there is this concept of universal nested hierarchy, hierarchical holarchy. Holarchy is a hierarchy of multiple holons or individual parts which are whole in themselves and at multiple levels of biophysical organization, like energy, information, molecules, cells, organs, human beings, societies, humanity, solar system, galaxies, universe, and beyond. Finally, we come back to my last slide of the last lecture, and also I thought I would end here briefly mentioning about neurophilosophy. And one of the profound statements in Kashmir Shaivism, Shiva Sutra, is Chaitanya Mahatma. Chaitanya means awareness itself or pure consciousness. Is Atma, is the self. Ishavasya Upanishad, Ishavasyam idam sarvam. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is another Upanishadic statement. The whole earth is my home. Sarvam Khaluidam Brahma. All this is one reality, one spiritual entity, one spirit. This painting was done by Marc Chagall, 1911, and he titled it I and the Village. If you look at the painting, of course, it's an impression. His memory is about that village, and his impression and expression of the symbolic expression of the events in that village and his memories of it and his love for it. Hey Vishwati Mahajagar Sant Jnaneshwaran said, the whole Vishwa, the whole universe is my home. Observer is the observed is J. Krishnamurti. He also wrote a book called You Are the World. And Sri Raman Maharshi said, there are no others. So there is this one existence, one being. I had mentioned in some of my talks, quantum nature embodies and embeds all life. Or my recent favorite phrase is live presence. Our very existential presence is live. And I tried to understand that there is not only the live voice within, the inner voice, but there is also live inner silence. And we'll need to learn to differentiate between that live voice, inner voice, and the live inner silence. Once you experience that live inner silence authentically and spontaneously, it will change you forever. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Vrushali?
वृषाली नसणार आहे. मागच्या सायंटिफिक बेसिस पासून नाउ वी आर ब्रिजिंग इनटू द धार्मिक और आध्यात्मिक मोड ऑफ थिंकिंग और वर्किंग. तो आज ज्या गोष्टी विनोद काकांनी प्रेझेंट केल्या, that will be far more meaningful when we cross over to the next one. That's what I felt about listening to this session. या पाठोपाठ आपण आता भजन सेवेकडे वळूयात. नीता जोशी आज आपल्याला भजन सेवा द्यायला उपस्थित आहेत आपल्यामध्ये. राम के गुण गायो, आजचं भजन. नीता जोशी, तुम्ही सुरू करू शकता.
ओके. नमस्कार सर्वांना, माझा नमस्कार. येतोय ना आवाज ऐकू?
हो, येतोय.
ओके. कारुण्यरूपं करुणाकरन्तं श्रीरामचन्द्रं शरणं प्रपद्ये। राम का गुणगान करिए, राम का गुणगान करिए। राम प्रभु की भद्रता का, सत्यता का ध्यान धरिए, ध्यान धरिए। राम का गुणगान करिए, राम का गुणगान करिए। सारे मारे सा, सारे पामा पामा, धनी रे नी सारे धा, सारे धा पामा। राम के गुण गुण चिरंतन, राम के गुण गुण चिरंतन। राम गुण सुमिरन रतन धन, राम गुण सुमिरन रतन धन। मनुजता को कर विभूषित, मनुजता को कर विभूषित। मनुज को धनवान करिए, मनुज को धनवान करिए। ध्यान धरिए, राम का गुणगान करिए, राम का गुणगान करिए। धपनी धपम गरी गरी सा, धपनी धपम गरी गरी सा। म ग म धनी सा नि धपम। सगुण ब्रह्म स्वरूप सुंदर, सगुण ब्रह्म स्वरूप सुंदर। सृजन रंजन रूप सुखकर, सृजन रंजन रूप सुखकर। राम आत्मा, राम आत्मा, राम आत्मा। राम का सम्मान करिए, राम का सम्मान करिए। ध्यान धरिए, राम का गुणगान करिए। राम प्रभु की भद्रता का, सत्यता का ध्यान धरिए, ध्यान धरिए। राम का गुणगान करिए, राम का गुणगान करिए। नमस्कार.
धन्यवाद नीताताई, फारच सुंदर भजन झालं. हा, जर कोणाला प्रश्न असले तर आपण आपला कॅमेरा सुरू करून विचारू शकता. विनोद काका, एक प्रश्न असा विचारतो. मागच्या आठवड्यात